6 out of 10 Republicans recommend FTR Radio to everyone they know. The other 4 are rhinos. FTR Radio. Online at FTRradio.com. FTR Radio salutes some of the great Democrat presidents in the radio era. FTR Radio.
You're listening to Liz and Taylor.
Alright, so why can't I get another tattoo? Come on.
Because you get another tattoo, then you start talking another gun.
But not the movie star. The battling duo from the Right War on FTR Radio.
Oh, come on.
You're the one who said it.
That was a joke, partially.
Enlist in the Right War. Won't cost you nothing. Not as good as military service. But it's got to count for something, right?
Good evening, folks. Thank you for listening to FTR Radio. I'm Liz Harrison. This is The Right War. No, there still is not a Taylor around. He is hiding. He has gone underground or something. Actually, he did disappear from the social media, too. So you won't find him on Facebook or Twitter. But I do have Dustin Hoyt from America Our Way, which is typically heard in the hour before this wonderful show on Thursday nights over on the Vigilant Liberty Radio. Hi, Dustin.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Yeah, I was warning everybody. The libertarians were taking over, and I showed red to the bull. This is theoretically a bourbon-free episode.
Oh, gosh.
Be afraid. And even worse, there's Pellegrino.
Oh, goodness.
Of course, you know, I told everybody, that's the last of my discussion of that on air. If you want to know whether or not I broke down and opened up either the Devil's Cut or the Jim Beam Black, you gotta be in the chat room. I mean, yeah. Of course, this caused, you know, a little argument on the Twitter between Thomas LeDuc and myself. Because he's a Detroit Tigers fan, and I'm from Pittsburgh. Which means that, yeah, Pirates, yay. Oh, you got tickets to the Lexus Club? Excellent. Let's go.
Oh, so, man.
I'm terrible. What can I say?
You in that Lexus Club.
I know.
I don't blame you at all, but...
No. Yeah, I'm so happy when I can get my hands on tickets there. But, yeah, that's pretty much the extent of my thing with the Pirates.
Yeah, every Astros game I've been to was a free ticket, so...
Yeah.
You know, not that the Astros are anything spectacular to go watch, so...
Well, PNC Park is a wonderful park. Last night was Dollar Night.
There you go.
Yeah, that was good. I don't think that they had dollar brews, but... They did have dollar peanuts and hot dogs and sodas at more than just the little kids' concession stand, which is also known as the place where all the college kids go to get their food, too. Well, you know, they're poor.
I do know. I haven't been out of college that long. I still live in the college bubble. I'm still in that entry-level poor man's land. So yeah. I hear it. I can resonate. Dollar peanuts, all about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was what I took the kid to a afternoon game. You know, the executives' afternoon off, and took the kid. Couldn't stand our seats because they were in the sun.
Of course.
So we ended up in the walkway over across by where the kids' food was. You know, chicken fingers, pizza, and fries, and a couple drinks. And I spent under $10. So
winning.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't get a thing of wings for less than $10 upstairs.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Today I got all excited because I was looking for lunch, and they were like half price burgers at Sonic today, and I was like, guess we're having Sonic.
Yep.
That their fiscal responsibility.
Definitely. Okay, and you can't have that if you've got the 15 an hour deal.
Yeah.
Just saying. But they were out in force.
Oh gosh, I posted this on Facebook earlier on my personal page. I haven't done anything on America Our Way about it yet, but I can't help but think these protests they just make me agree with Rand Paul even more on his stance coming out today. Not today, but coming out, in like the last week, heavily saying he wants to get rid of the Department of Education and just keep the money at home in the States. And I was like, well, it's not like we could do any worse. You're supposed to take an economics class to graduate, and you can see a giant swath of the nation that didn't quite get that learning.
No.
So it's unfortunate. Yep.
Oh, we have a question from the chat room. A libertarian named Hoyt, does he have a Portuguese mother?
No, I do not. My mother is Irish Catholic, daughter of teachers, so no Portuguese here as far as I know.
Yeah, and a resident of the kingdom right now.
Yeah, she's in Saudi Arabia right now, so that's, as some of you may know, where I grew up and where I spent most of my childhood, so it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, part of the reason why you and I end up going rounds.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely a source of quality on-air material there.
Yeah, because I'm such an evil person. I am a horrible, horrible Islamophobe. Of course, I was really... I finally broke down and started reading some of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I believe it was Infidel that I picked up on the Kindle. And I was surprised because when I hear her and read script from her speeches, I always get the impression that she still has rose-colored glasses on to a certain extent. And I want to, like, scream or something. Because I'm like, come on now, stop it. You lived it. We know this. And, placing it in perspective, she was subject to one of the horrible things that a lot of activists that are actually honest with themselves, even on the left, will stand up against, and that's FGM. So, yeah, and of course, she had done a film, and the individual who had done the film with her had been killed because of doing the film. So, yeah, she's seen some of the ugliest portions of Islam, and it was all directed specifically at her. So it would always bother me because she'd sit there and say, we need reform, and I'm sitting here thinking, and you have anything left for that way of life and that faith? How?
Well, I think
I can't wrap my head around it.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things you kind of have to experience, and it's very easy to be black and white about it when you look at just the text and stuff like that, but when you look at it in terms of people and people you've met and people I had Thanksgiving dinner with many Muslims. I had they were in class with me, they were my childhood friends, and it's an entirely different perspective when you're talking about a large amount of people as opposed to just a group in a far-off corner of the world, or, a group in a large portion of the world. But when you know them personally, it changes the dynamic for you in terms of what you're against and what you're for. And so for this lady, obviously being brought up in it and everything, she is talking about family members when she's talking about Islam. So she's not going to be condemning it in that sense, because obviously she'd be condemning her family and, the good people at the madrasa she met and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's hard for someone to have a swath condemnation of a group when it's, your childhood friends, your childhood teachers and stuff like that. So, and I think that's what it is. And I think when you look at it, there are situations and people that make it harder to condemn the entire group as a populace. So that's just kind of where I lie. Like, one of my best friends growing up was a half American, half Saudi kid that I grew up with. And I'm not going to say his name, obviously, but we played baseball together. We had sleepovers. I babysat his little brother. I mean, he was just a normal kid, but he was subject to more heinous hate crimes than any white person I met in Saudi Arabia. And it was because he was half white. And so people would, beat him up for being half white. And he would get called all kinds of slurs and stuff. And, now he's very successful, gone to college, him and his brother both, and they're in America and fine. But, in elementary school and junior high, it was a very serious thing. And so, you can see those hardcore crazed groups and easily condemn them, but then, you see the ones that are subject to condemnation that they can't help but give you a little glimmer of hope that some change is possible on some level.
Well,
it's just a personal issue as opposed to an objective one.
Well, one thing that you said with her relating to family and all of that, bear in mind that she had been mutilated on the order of a family member, so...
well, we all got that one crazy uncle.
Yeah, and that literally was the case. It was an uncle.
Yeah, I know.
So, but again, from the chat room, because Tom is trying to stay awake because he's had a very rough day, and I don't know if he's still on the caffeine high. But he said, "I know a Muslim woman raised in the U.S. She's pushing 40 now. She's usually fun to talk with. She wears a scarf occasionally, but she has a beer occasionally too." He said he met her in person at CPAC and other conservative gatherings, and one night, maybe 3 years ago, in one of the late night bull sessions that happened at such gatherings, she just casually said, "Of course, death is the penalty for apostasy."
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not something you can discount, and that's why there needs to be a middle-of-the-road position where, you've got the hardcores that want to nuke that whole portion and go to war with them and all kinds of stuff, but then you also have to remember, the ones that helped Marcus Luttrell, the ones that were helpful to soldiers over there, the ones that I grew up with that were nice. It's not... You can't stereotype an entire group that way. You can certainly condemn their governments. You can certainly condemn, entire wings of their religion. Absolutely. You can condemn even some of the practices they allow, and you can chide them for practices that they're not protesting against and not more vocal about. Absolutely. They're fair game for criticism. You don't want to go too far in the hatred and into that sweeping blows, if you will, because then you have to remember there are still good ones. There are always good ones.
Oh, I realize that. It's really difficult because arguably you had someone who was one of the good ones, and they're sitting there making a comment like that. And yeah, I've been there too. I know a few people who had either previously, now they'd be considered, individuals that if, everything went really crazy, they'd be some of the first people they kill.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, because they'd be considered guilty of apostasy because they basically backed away from Islam altogether. But, it's not a pretty situation at all. And
no, not at all.
Talking about ones that, we have this chat about moderate Islam, and I'm like, where?
Cyprus, Jordan.
No, because I still, and you know this, I have a friend who's living in Jordan, and she's extremely sheltered there.
Absolutely.
And it's not just because she's American. It's because she is married to an Islamic man. And
yeah.
The issue is that she made a bargain. I mean, if they had stayed here in the States, I really don't know how that marriage would have gone down. And I don't really know if it would have stayed. But she is completely kept out of the loop on a lot of things that a, quote, normal marriage here in the States would definitely involve. Like, she has no idea about a lot of things that go on under her own roof. She's extremely limited in how she can travel, when she can travel. And it's just really disturbing.
Well, let me put it to you like this. Like, for my parents, for example, when my mom leaves the country without my dad, she has to have a permission slip from him.
Right.
Which
I know that in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, like, and in my house's dynamic, that's hilarious, because my parents are very much co-equal, and even, my mom's kind of an ornery lady, and my dad's very laid back, so it's interesting that dad's giving mom a permission slip, and they always crack a lot of jokes about it, but when you go to that country, that is the choice you've made. It's not like you didn't know what you were getting yourself into, and that also applies for people who are, they're marrying an Islamic person that's a practicing Muslim, that's devout. You're getting yourself into that situation. And, you could argue that there are some people who are not knowledgeable about it and don't know what they're getting into, but as long as they're in the United States or in a free country, there's no problem in them getting out. Now, I don't know what the policy is in Jordan, but in the States it's not a big deal. But in some Muslim countries, it's a divorce is as easy as saying I divorce you 3 times, and then just telling the elders or whatever that you're done. So it's not a big to-do, but, I think in Saudi Arabia, it has to be a reason for it for the woman. But, again, it's just one of those situations, like, you stepped in this. Like, you either have to live with it, or you have to find a way to get out. But you had ample opportunity to educate yourself on what you're getting into.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't pity these people. Not that they're deserving of it, but I don't pity them because they chose it. It's their choice. And if that's what they want to do, more power to them, I don't have to like it. I don't have to condone it, but it's their life. I don't have any business telling them how to live it. As long as they're not dictating to me, which I think is the main discussion with Islam and Sharia law, as long as they're not dictating what I have to do, there's no problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that is not exactly how things typically run whenever you're talking about organizations that have a basic desire to, reinstate the caliphate.
Agreed. And that's the case with a lot of these countries. But in cases outside of that, there are still very good people coexisting and not causing any problems. And there are many who oppose the caliphate that, it should be a voluntary thing, not this swath of war. Like, if we were to vote in a Muslim president, then that's who we voted for. And, you could argue the merits of democracy if that's the case, but
we're a republic, and technically the government, even if we did vote in a Muslim, and I know there are a lot of wacky people out there that like to claim that Obama is one, and that's not the case. But, that doesn't necessarily work so well here in the U.S., if only because the First Amendment would sort of, kind of get in the way.
And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of our system of government, is that, we believe our rights stem from God, and even if a majority of people want to vote for something, they don't have the right to do so. And that just kind of goes with what I was saying. It's all about choice. And when you move here to America, you can't just impose your will like you can in Europe, as we've seen. But here in America, we don't allow you to take our rights away based on popular vote. So I think that's a lot of the reason why you have some of the liberal scholars saying that we need to repeal the Second Amendment, is because they know that there's no getting around this legally as long as that protection is in place. And since they know there's no way of that happening, they have to try and do things at the state level more than anything. So, and even then, they're likely to get challenged in court.
Right. Well, of course, the chat room, Obama is an atheist. I don't believe that either. I think that basically he is a very confused man. And I say that from experience of seeing it, for better or worse, many years ago, or at least, sometime in the 90s. I used to end up helping local ministers that were having issues with youth that were getting involved in questionable spiritual practices, primarily, paganism.
Okay.
That sort of thing. We had a few really predatory groups going around getting these kids involved in all sorts of strange things. And, of course, the ministers were freaking out severely.
Huh.
So, because I had been involved with a few of the groups that were guilty, quote unquote, I went and said, well, one minister asked if I would go and talk to them, and I agreed, and it just sort of snowballed from there. But I'd end up going and talking to some of those teenagers, and that's what I see in Obama. Those confused teenagers that had no idea what they were dabbling in. They were playing around with writings by Aleister Crowley and all of that. And that's dangerous, dangerous territory.
Well, I mean, the thing about
esoteric numerology, etc.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people are going to be people, if we're going to put it that way. But I think in Obama's case, it's interesting because I'm going to give a credit to Glenn Beck here, because I think he tried to sum it up this way, but didn't quite go all the way there. When you look at the way Obama was raised, he was raised by a communist family in an anti-communist era. I mean, he is the anti-Ron Paul, if you will, or he was raised by the anti-Ron Paul. So he would be like Rand Paul, but the opposite, because he was raised by a family of communists and then moved to a Muslim country, obviously. So he was immersed in a family and a culture that was very critical and arguably even hated America and what America stood for. So when you look at the way he practiced Christianity, he didn't go into a church that preached love and faith. He preached, God's punishing America for its wicked ways. And so it was more the same for Obama. And so when you look at, how he preaches Christianity or how he practices it, such as this latest prayer breakfast where he's hypercritical of Christianity, that's all he knows is critical. He right. hasn't been ever part of a group that was, pro-America, pro-positivity, if you will. And so I wouldn't say he's confused so much as he's just a metaphorical pessimist. It's all about joining the group and then being in that very vocal, critical minority that may or may not understand what they're talking about.
Well, when I say the confusion, I'm saying that he's doing it in the opposite direction of the teenagers that I was dealing with. The teenagers were getting the wrong idea about this new philosophy that they were being introduced to. They were just totally, taken blind side, and given a BS story much the same way that anybody else would go, like anybody would try to get somebody involved in a cult. So, Obama's exposure to Islam is not real. He was too young to comprehend any of the larger concepts or to truly be exposed to them. So he only knows the artful beauty. You know, because recall he mentioned saying that the morning call to prayer was one of the most beautiful sounds he'd ever heard. So, obviously, this is something that he's placed it on a pedestal in much the same way he's placed his father on one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not very different from the teenager being sold a bill of goods on a really negative philosophy for the sake of, sucking them in. It's just going in the opposite, coming from the opposite direction, so to speak. He had a short-lived exposure, and the exposure he had was not anything close to reality. And yeah, the radical black theology did not help.
Right, and to give Obama credit, the Islam that I was exposed to was all strokes. I mean, we had mutawas that chased people out of stores. We had, the crazy, hateful people that would, demand shopkeepers not serve us because of us being American. I mean, we saw that side. But we also saw the side where Saudi shopkeepers would step up and say, "What's wrong with you? These are people. You can't hate them for what their government does. You can't hate them for their religion." And so, I saw both sides of it in its natural element. And as to the prayer call, it's like religious karaoke. I mean, you've got a guy doing the loudspeakers, and sometimes they're in tune and sometimes they're not. And where I was situated, it was usually like 3 or 4 prayer calls going off at mosques. So it was a mixture of 3 or 4 voices, and sometimes it was really great harmony and it was nice, and then other times there was just one guy that was out of key and you're like, "Oh, could you stop? You're terrible." So,
right.
So I mean, I see where he's coming from, and it being a beautiful sound. I mean, at 5 a.m., I disagree strongly that any loud noise is a beautiful sound, but sometimes it was nice. I mean, it's just people singing, especially if it's in a language you don't understand. It's just foreign music. It's singing. So it's one of those scenarios where, he's not being completely outlandish in his statement that it can be beautiful. And who knows? He could have had Aretha Franklin, her brother, doing the speaker at the mosque he was near. I don't know. But, I can imagine that being a nice sound if it's a good singer. But that was just my experience being around it. It wasn't, a foreign alienating thing for me because it was just always present. I mean, the big thing is we'd be out shopping, and you come lunchtime, you're hungry, and you're searching for a restaurant, just blistering trying to get there fast before prayer call starts so you don't get locked out and don't get lunch. And you have to sit out for 30 minutes and wait. So that was annoying. But otherwise, it wasn't, I could see where he's coming from there. So it's similar to the Islam I was exposed to, in that there's a lot of nice people doing a lot of great things, and it's hard for me to look at it and say, how do you hate this entire group? Because a good portion of my friends, a quarter of them, were in that environment with me and are Muslim, and they're just my friends. I've never classified them as Muslims in that sense.
Well, to place it in perspective, and to understand why the hatred. My grandfather, during World War II, he was classified 4F, but he was still placed in the United States Army. He was attached to the United States Army Air Force, like the Army Air, and he was sent to Arizona. He got sick while he was there. My grandmother was thrown off the base without any warning, dropped off in town, because somebody was supposedly coming on the base. And she was a bookkeeper for the Army, so she technically wasn't... She was a civilian employee. Yeah. She wasn't a female member of the ranks, but... Yeah, they threw her off the base. Nobody actually came that night. Why did they do that to her? Well, later on, much later on, my grandfather's brother found out. The reason why they threw my grandmother off the base was because somebody went and told somebody in the brass that my grandfather had cousins in Germany, and that my grandmother had accepted mail from them shortly before the war. You know, they didn't send it back RTS. And in that mail were included letters, but also photographs of the cousins in SS uniforms. So the hatred of the Germans, they couldn't throw my grandfather off the base because, you know, he was a member of the military, and double down, he was sick. But the nurses treated him like crap. And once the word got out, you know, because this was one of those little whisper things, his cousins are Nazis. You know?
Right.
So this is how it went down. Then, when my grandfather was well again, he sort of kind of realized what was going on. I mean, his brother found out definitely, but he sort of suspected that was what was going on. So my grandfather would always be going and saying things or singing, you know, like, you know, whistle while you work type deal. What was his job? It was to put planes back together again after they had been fired on over Britain.
Audrey doesn't like Nazis.
Audrey doesn't like Nazis. But, yeah, he was putting the planes back together to go shoot down Nazis. And he would go and literally just be talking about, oh, I wonder how many Nazis you're going to shoot down, talking to the planes, you know, sort of like Ducky on NCIS talking to corpses. Yeah. And his mark, because he'd mark everything he did. He did it his entire life working with the sheet metal. He had put his mark on every single one. And he'd sit there. He went and actually asked around. And he ended up getting replies from some of the airmen that used those planes later on during the war and after. And he found out that quite a few of the planes had been very important in a lot of battles. Little family rumor was that he did some minor repairs to the Memphis Belle.
Right.
Before she went on her cross-country tour.
Right.
We don't know if that's actually true or not. You know, it's filed under legend type deal. Because anybody that did work on it was theoretically told they weren't to talk about it.
Right.
So, because apparently the plane was extremely battered. And nobody wanted anybody to really know that. In other words, from what I had heard from my grandfather for years, that was, you know, that plane shouldn't have made it back.
Mm-hmm.
It was just purely miraculous that it did. But anyway, he would always play the D-Day record. Big 33, 2 sides. It is a recording of the initial press coverage of D-Day. He played it every year. Every year. I finally talked him out of playing the record. Because we were worried it was starting to get worn down. So, yeah, I took it and I recorded it and I cleaned up, like got the scratchiness out of it with the mixer and equalizer. and gave him a tape, and it was in really good condition. He was like, oh, perfect. But he'd still pull the record out. He didn't put it on the turntable and play it, but he'd pull the record out because it had a little booklet with it, and he'd sit there and look through the pictures and all of that. So this is a man who was that dedicated, but to this day we still have the pictures of the Nazis. And I asked him, why didn't you get rid of them? And he said, they're still family. Everybody hated me because of them, but they're still family. So, as for understanding the mentality of hating an entire group of people, yeah, I know the drill.
Yeah, well, there you go. Then
I definitely know the drill. My uncle married a German national, and he had about the same deal, too, on the other side of my family. People would ask her really impudent questions like, were your family Nazis? Well, yeah, some of them were. But people don't understand that it was filed under lead, follow, or be destroyed.
Yep.
I mean, that's all there was to it. If you were not a Nazi, then you were just as bad as a Jew. And you would easily end up being killed for no apparent reason other than the fact that you were not a Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't matter what you were.
Exactly.
There were only two sides. So, yeah, my family is that. There's nothing I can do about it. And if it was any closer to that time, I have no doubt I would be a target. I'd have people sitting there saying, oh, your family, they were horrible people and all of that. Do I think that my cousins were horrible, heartless killers and believed all of it? Not necessarily. I mean, it's filed under, you've got to do to survive.
Not only that, you got the whole, I was just doing my job, folks, too.
Yes and no. I mean, it's still down to the you got to do to survive deal, because if you didn't do your job, you get shot.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm just adding to it, not to take away from what you said at all.
Yeah, well, that's where we're at with Islam, at least I think. We're reaching a point where it's going to have to break down to, are we going to have people who stand up and say, enough is enough, to the radicals, or are we just going to continue seeing exactly the same thing we saw in Germany? A lot of really good people doing a lot of really horrible things, or turning a blind eye to a lot of really horrible things, because that's the only way to survive. And unfortunately, ISIS is showing that that's pretty much the way it is.
Well, I mean, we are not at all conflating ISIS and everyone, but you're exactly right. There's a lot of people that want to get out of ISIS and probably can't, but because it was romanticized as one thing and turns out it's another. But
yeah, there's that, but it's also the concept that ISIS is just going into territories and mowing people down if they don't agree with them.
No, yeah, 100%. And there's got to be plenty of people in ISIS-held territory that disagree with ISIS. I mean, it goes without saying. And I think we had this conversation before, where I think that has a lot to do with an unarmed populace being able to defend themselves or not. And this is why we were talking about whether or not they should be allowed to be armed. But there's nothing they can do in the situation they're currently in, or at least that's the way it appears. And
right.
It's unfortunate, but that's the way the world works when you're at the mercy of a well-armed group. It is what it is. But I think also when you're looking at the issue of Islam as a whole, you have to look at Egypt and them ousting the Muslim Brotherhood after they started pulling shenanigans. And you have to look at, the King of Jordan himself leading airstrikes against ISIS. So while some of them have varying degrees of messed upness, it's hard to condemn them as a whole when you've got groups actively fighting against ISIS and, actively working against these groups in the name of Islam. I wish that the movement was more prevalent, and I think it ought to be more prevalent. But that's where my holdout is there. There's too much moderation that does exist to condemn it as a whole. But ISIS, that's a whole nother animal. They are the Nazis of the Muslim world.
Right. Now, of course, I've said before, and the individual at the Atlantic, I believe, said it too. The one who had said what ISIS is. But there are John Bolton and Lord knows how many other people have essentially gone to this point and said that we are down to a religious war between the Sunnis and the Shias. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I don't think anybody's questioning that. These are two warring tribes.
The Obama administration is.
Well, they can say what they want. It doesn't mean it's correct. But,
right.
But, with the Sunni and Shia thing, I've got a lot of personal experience with that because the part of Saudi we lived in, obviously Sunni held and ruled, but there were Shiite minorities that would get pushed out into they would have their neighborhoods that were segregated, and sort of like what happens in Israel, they uproot the populace and push them out of these suburbs and further out, and so they have to keep getting constantly pushed into further and further out into the country, if you will, because they have to make room for like to sit with like. And so it is an active and oppressive thing, and it goes both ways. Just depends on which side's in power in which country. So, it's ignorant to say that that's not the case and that's not what's going on. It's also ignorant to say it's impossible for them to coexist, because they do in many places. It's just not. It's not a perfect system, and it's not. They don't have the same way of thinking that we do here in America or in the Western world, that you can live beside someone diametrically opposed to you as long as you're not, infringing upon each other. And since they don't have that, they actively infringe upon each other, thinking that they're, doing for their cause, if you will. So it is what it is.
Right. And basically, we're looking at a very dangerous situation because of the fact that we don't have an administration that's paying attention. And arguably, okay, now, I know I'm going to have a lot of people annoyed with me when I say this, but ISIS arguably came from the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm going to make that leap, even though a lot of people would say that you can't go and draw a definitive line. And I'm not sure that anybody has yet. But the reason why I say that is because the Muslim Brotherhood is Sunni, correct?
I honestly don't know. I don't pay them much mind since their fall in Egypt.
Right. Well, they're still out there. They're still relevant to a certain extent. They still exist here in the U.S. in the form of CARE, if you go and follow with that general principle, because they had originally been organized by the Muslim Brotherhood back when the organization first came here and before it was called CARE. But, and we're talking back in the 60s there. But getting back into really deep history here, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood had been relatively involved with the Germans during World War II, or in the days leading up to it. They had been involved in an anti-Zionist movement, so to speak, preventing Jews from returning to Israel, or destroying them when they got there, one or the other. There are arguments there as to what was going on, but the bottom line was, even back then, the argument over that land was still going on. And it has been forever. but for all intents and purposes. But anyway, when I look at ISIS, I keep on thinking, wow, we're still taking from Hitler's playbook. Old habits die hard.
Well, here's the thing about Hitler. I mean, say what you want about the man and his policy, you can't deny that he was a brilliant tactician. And you know, evil as his ideas may be, the man understood strategy, he understood propaganda, that none of that is up for debate. And so when somebody's pulling from his playbook, you know, you can obviously associate them with Hitler, but generally speaking, the policies accomplished the goals that they were laid out to accomplish. I mean, the same is said about Noam Chomsky, that he's very subversive and evil, and the people that implement his policy should be condemned. And there's nothing wrong with making that comparison, but you also can't deny the effectiveness of the tactic. Right. And so, you know, there's a reason Mein Kampf is still one of the top-selling books in the world. And it's not just a biographical look at a deranged maniac. There are sound totalitarian policies in there, and anybody looking to bring totalitarianism into the world is going to be looking to Hitler for cues.
Oh, see, I thought the memoir of a deranged lunatic was It Takes a Family by Rick Santorum.
Frothy. Oh,
sorry, I couldn't
Rick
resist.
Santorum. No, bless you, that was good. I don't get the Santorum love. I don't get it. I think I ever will. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and a little news flash to all the people who were really excited about his book on blue-collar workers. I'm still trying to find out exactly who it was, but I'm going to make a big guess here. It was a ghostwriter. Just saying, because it's entirely contrary to what the man ever stood for. Just saying, he never gave a damn about blue-collar workers. Believe me, I know. We lived here and had to deal with it. So...
he's a crazy person. It always irks me when people talk about him and his viability and you know, him being good at anything. It always irks me because it's just indicative of someone who's not paying attention or is voting on one issue so hardcore that they're willing to drop any pretense of being about limited government or freedom.
Right.
It's just, it hurts my heart.
Yeah. Rick Santorum never met a government program he didn't like. Just saying. As long as it was introduced by a Republican, you know.
Oh, he was a very good ball player.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And see, don't kid yourselves, folks. We're looking at a battle here between 3 different parties, even though it looks like it's only 2.
Absolutely, and you know, I have a lot of respect for the people that are working hard to try and unite everyone behind a candidate, or you know, trying to play nice to the point that you know they want to see you know people tip their hat when they lose and line up behind the GOP candidate. But for a lot of people, that's just not an option because the other candidates are people like Rick Santorum, and I don't think Rick Santorum's going to get the nomination, but the comparison is apt in this case because a lot of people, especially those in the religious community, the only issue that they will vote on is life, period. And so they could care less about some of the other stuff. It just depends on how pro-life the candidate is and how willing they are to do work to get abortion as banned as possible. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And you know, in my case, I'm not a Republican. I'm not even a registered Republican. I never have been. For me, it's all about voting for the candidate that pushes the Republican Party further towards freedom. And outside of that, I have no interest in the GOP. It's just there's a spark of hope there, and as long as they embrace it, you know, I'm with them. Otherwise, they alienate me as a group. So, and I know there's a lot of people that makes them mad, but it's just how the system works. There's a lot of people that get pushed aside when you converge on a candidate. It just depends on which candidate to determine who gets pushed aside.
Well, my basic answer at this point is to libertarians. Please, please, please encourage as many of your ranks to run as Republicans.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because you're never going to organize the Libertarians and become a legitimate, powerful party that will actually get any significant number of seats. However, you are going to be able to co-opt the Republicans and essentially hijack the party, which would be a good thing.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And you know, there's been a lot of big libertarian voices that have been having this conversation loudly and arguing about it. And one such voice, obviously, you've got, oh gosh, I can't remember his name. Stephen something or other, the Iraqi vet anarchist guy that was a hardcore Ron Paul supporter, does the Freedom Show.
Oh, good God.
Yeah, you know the one.
I know who you mean.
Okay, so he did an open letter to Rand Paul, basically saying he's a charlatan that's messing all over his father's legacy of principled liberty, without acknowledging that Ron Paul was a Republican.
Right.
And
right.
So when you look at the situation and you look at how much Ron Paul accomplished in terms of actual legislation and extra seats won for the Libertarian Party, you see not very much. I think that Ron Paul's victories were all philosophical. He showed that you could hold office and be principled, but he also did a great job of spreading the philosophy of liberty to people. And I think that's where the split is between libertarians, and they've demonstrated this in their very loud arguments all across the interwebs. You've got the libertarians who believe you have to be absolutely principled in liberty in all of your actions, or you're a charlatan and they hate you and they're going to vote for Gary Johnson again and lose again. But then you got the other side, like myself and Julie Borowski and Marianne Copenhaver, known as Libertarian Girl. She's on Facebook if you want to see her stuff. We've all been very loud and active, just like Students for Liberty, Young Americans for Liberty, in supporting Rand Paul, and that's because most of us are practical libertarians. We know that the absolute best way to get more liberty right now is to elect libertarian-leaning Republicans to show that it's a viable way of thinking and it's a viable way to win American votes. And so that's the camp I'm in, and that's, you know, I'm not ashamed to say it, I've donated to Rand Paul, I plan on campaigning for him, and you know, even though I disagree with him on a lot of stuff since he's moved to the right, whether or not, you know, he's full of it or not, based on his past, is neither here nor there, because I believe that he'll do more good in the long term for liberty than any of the other candidates. I think Ted Cruz could do a good job as well, because he's very strong on constitutional rights, even the ones he disagrees with. Now, I think he panders a lot to his base, but I also think that that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as he continues his reverence of the Constitution.
Well, my basic idea is that, you know, more likely than not, I will be pushing up daisies before I really see a significant change in the Republican Party swaying toward libertarian values. But the bottom line is, the more libertarians that you have running under the Republican ticket and actually holding office, the more likely it is that they will be able to effect real change in the standard held by the Republican Party itself. And the fact is that if the Republican Party doesn't shift in that direction, and particularly does not give up its ridiculously stupid attachment to the religious right, then all is lost. Goldwater was right. And that's it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I think a Goldwater revival is exactly what Republicans need. And I think that the Tea Party was a big indicator of that, because it brought in many libertarians into the fold. The Tea Party was exactly what we wanted to hear. Taxed enough already, government leave us alone. And that resonated with so many conservatives too. So, I mean, it was a great sampling of what could happen if these policies are embraced, if the philosophy is embraced. So, you know, a lot of people say, oh, libertarians are a lost cause, and they're not gonna be a real factor, and it's a pipe dream, and yada yada. But when you look at the Tea Party and what they stood for, I mean, they did a lot of flag waving and a lot of quoting the Bible, but their chief message was always smaller government, period. And that's something libertarians can get behind, especially, if it obviously is bad when they move on social issues, but, that was not their overwhelming battle cry. That was not their mandate, and that was appealing.
Right. So, and we're out of time again, so thank you, Dustin, for joining us, and you can follow him at America Our Way on the Twitter, and on the show post tonight, you can catch him on the Facebook page. Follow his page, it's great. And I will be back here tomorrow night, another talk on liberty type stuff, because everybody loves pie. Jason Pie is supposed to be here, so thank y'all for listening. Say bye, Dustin.
Bye, Dustin.
Good night, folks.